Today, I'm delighted to welcome Michael Fraccaro, the Chief People Officer at Mastercard, to the Digital HR Leaders podcast. Michael, it's a pleasure to have you as a guest on the show and speak to you about the work you and the team are doing at Sorry, let's start that one again. So let's start again. Today, I'm delighted. Sorry, Master. I don't know why. I mean, to him, but yeah, weird. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Michael Fraccaro, Chief People Officer at Mastercard, to the Digital HR Leaders podcast. Michael, it's a pleasure to speak to you and learn about the work you're doing at Mastercard, you and the team. To get us started, please could you share a little bit about your journey and your current role as Chief People Officer at Mastercard?
Yeah, well, thanks, David, for the invitation to be on your podcast. Looking forward to the discussion today. My journey before Mastercard actually started off as a high school teacher. So I graduated university, started my career in one of the high schools in Sydney, Australia, where I grew up, but then found a calling to enter the world of HR. And I then worked with a technology company in Australia, which supported credit unions, so not-for-profit financial institutions in Australia. Did that for a number of years. And then I had another calling, which was to go global, and I found a job in Saudi Arabia. So I moved to Riyadh and stayed there for a couple of years working for one of the banks there. And the role that I had was head of training and career planning. Returned to Australia, and then the urge to move abroad again came up, and I joined HSBC, moved to Hong Kong, and I was with HSBC for about 12 years in a variety of HR generalist roles as well as COE roles. So I sort of pivoted between the two. And then end of 2012, Mastercard came calling, and my wife and I moved from Hong Kong, and we moved to New York. And I've been with Mastercard ever since 2012, and in the role of Chief People Officer since the middle of 2016. And so I'm here today still with you.
And so 8 years as a Chief People Officer. It's been quite a time to be a Chief People Officer in a global company like Mastercard. Before we get on to some of the work you're doing, from a personal perspective, how have you seen the role change over the last 8 years?
Oh, it's been a significant change. The work with the board, dealing with issues around culture, so organizational transformation and culture, and boards have been very engaged in terms of the topic of how is culture an asset and not a liability, and how can they detect in the few meetings that they have with management around what's really going on beyond an employee satisfaction survey. So we've spent quite a bit of time on that, and our board's been very engaged in that particular topic. And obviously dealing with various crises, whether it's geopolitical tensions around the world, exiting operations as we did in Russia, or dealing with the pandemic, which a lot of my colleagues and peers as CHROs, we had to navigate that and work with cross-functional teams to do all of that. So I think HR has evolved significantly, in addition to all the work that we've been focused on around org design, succession planning, capabilities, talent upskill, all those kinds of things. These other dimensions have really elevated, I think, the role of HR. And I think the piece around, well-being and the whole sustaining a workforce has been a big feature in the last few years, particularly in the time that I've been in this role.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, and we're going to touch on a number of these areas over the sort of next 45 minutes or so. And actually, as a thank you as well, Michael, you and, other members of your team share publicly at conferences and through articles some of the work you're doing, which I think acts as an inspiration for many of others in the field. And in fact, you were on a panel that I had the good fortune to chair in New York earlier this year on the topic of sort of talent marketplaces and skills, and we're definitely going to touch on that as well. I think, as you said, it's evident that your people function at Mastercard, and in fact, we're seeing it with other teams as well, as you alluded to as well, other HR functions, is becoming much more closely aligned with business strategy. How you talked a couple of examples there, but how are you seeing that this alignment is changing the way that HR supports the business?
Yeah, I mean, I've had the good fortune that, this topic in the early days was around HR has to have a seat at the table. And when I came to Mastercard, HR already had a high degree of credibility with the senior leadership team, the CEO at the time, and the board. And so that wasn't the challenge for us. It was more about how do we demonstrate value around the whole human capital proposition. So we very much focus around what are the, if you will, the growth algorithm for Mastercard. So we think about our business, how do we grow our core business, how do we diversify, how do we build new businesses. So this whole notion about the business strategy and connecting the people element has always been there. And we view HR like other enabling functions, such as marketing, so our brand, our technology, our franchise that we have, our data, which has become increasingly important, and obviously the people. And so that aspect around the interconnectivity between the business and its success, and the people and the skills that we need, and how we think about integrating acquisitions that we bring into all of those aspects, have someone from my team being a part of those conversations early on, whether it's a due diligence, whether it's a restructure, whatever it may be, there is a people dimension to it. And so I believe the more sophisticated organizations have already gone on that particular journey, and executive teams and CEOs have embraced already the forward-thinking HR expertise, because they see it's critical and vital to the vitality and the sustainability of their company.
Yeah, and obviously one aspect that we're seeing that increasingly, particularly as a like Mastercard, a technology company operating in the financial services sector, that's changing the way that HR is operating and supporting the business, is the integration of AI and generative AI into the workplace. Now, I know that Mastercard has shared some of the work that you're doing in that area, but for our listeners, Michael, how are you currently using this technology within HR at Mastercard?
Yeah, so we've always had AI within a lot of the products that we have, and obviously in an organization that has focused on payments, and obviously a key feature of payments is making sure there's trust in the ecosystem, and there's trillions of volume that is transacted every year, billions of transactions every day. We need to make sure that your experience when you're tapping out at the merchant is seamless, and all of the background friction that happens to make sure that you've got sufficient funds in your account, that there's a clearing, an authorization, and a settlement. All of that happens within seconds. And so we've always built in technology and AI to be able to do that, as well as from a fraud perspective, making sure that we're able to detect where there may be suspicious behavior in terms of people's payments and so forth. So it's always been a part of it. As we see now the evolution of AI, beyond just the products, we're also looking at it from a workforce perspective. So the deploying of various AI tools in the way that we're thinking about skills gaps. How do we identify skills gaps? So coming back to your earlier question around, as we think about workforce capabilities and the kind of businesses that we have, strategic workforce planning is a really important part of what we do. And so being able to deploy some of the tools that we have to look at the 34,000 employees' profiles, skill profiles, and being able to identify who has got a particular experience or a skill in an area that we're looking to invest in or grow in, these tools are able to provide that information far quicker than what we're able to do before. So that's sort of one example. As you know, when we met in March, I think it was, we talked about the internal talent marketplace. That is such a great example of being able to democratize opportunities for employees with the various projects and jobs and potential mentoring relationships that we've got across the world. And this tool enables the tool to learn my behavior and my preferences and my interest based on how I engage with this particular tool and platform. So it serves me up projects or jobs or whatever that may be a good fit for me. In the past, that was all done very manually. And quite often we would hear feedback from employees saying it's much easier to find a job externally than it is internally. And I think these kinds of tools and applications are just becoming better and better the more that we leverage them. So that's sort of one example. We also are a partner with Microsoft, and so we have deployed Copilot into our Teams environment as well. And so we're already beginning to see productivity improvements and also employee experience benefits as a result of deploying some of these tools to the wider Mastercard employee population. So things like if I'm traveling and I miss a particular meeting, I am able to pull out a summary or a recording of a meeting that I may have missed. Or if we've got people in a different geography or different time zone, they're able to pick up that meeting and what happened. I mean, it's those kinds of things. So from an employee experience as well, we're seeing great benefits. And then the last example I would use is next week we've got our board meeting, and we always provide them with an update on what we're doing from an innovation perspective, and particularly now with AI. And in the last few months, we've deployed a number of software engineering tools to be able to help our engineers do coding at a much faster rate than what they did before. And we're seeing great success in the initial pilot that we did, where the compiling of the code is far quicker than what it was done in the previous manual environment. And so what then happens is obviously the engineer has got more time to spend on either writing more code or doing a lot of the checking to make sure it's fitting within what our product lifecycle is. So it's those kinds of things that we're beginning to see a lot of benefit and upside. But again, David, you've got to do this in a thoughtful way and a responsible way. There are many people that are anxious about, what's this going to do to me and my job and so forth. And so we're taking people on a journey. A few weeks ago, we had our quarterly meeting-free day. So every quarter we have a meeting-free day, and we devoted that meeting-free day to an AI learning takeover. That's how we branded it, AI learning takeover. And our learning team basically curated a whole range of content, some which was developed in-house, others which we pulled from external sources, but basically said during this meeting-free day to all our employees, take the opportunity to learn as much as you can around AI and how it's going to change the way that we operate. And it's those kinds of things that I think are really important from an HR perspective to bring people along the journey with them.
And that'll lead nicely onto the next question in a minute. But before I do that, Michael, I think what's great about all of those examples that you gave on how you're using AI from a kind of people perspective at Mastercard is there's a clear business benefit from those examples that you gave, but there's a clear benefit for the employee as well. And I think it's that, and then that last piece you gave about the AI learning is the education piece as well, I think, which is so important. So it kind of links it all very nicely together. And on that education piece, you gave a good example there, I think, of how you're preparing the workforce. But how are you preparing your workforce for this kind of shift in working?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that we've done over the last 12 months. We have, firstly, you got to have the right org design, and so we've got some people call it a czar, an AI czar. So we've got someone who is basically heading up and shepherding our overall AI and data strategy for Mastercard, and that's an enterprise-wide role. In addition to that, we have a number of people from various departments, compliance, privacy, to ensure that whatever we're doing, we do it in a very responsible way. And that point I mentioned earlier about ensuring there's a level of trust in the ecosystem, we want to make sure that if we're training various algorithms, that they are doing what they're meant to be doing, and that we remove or mitigate any potential or perceived biases in whatever we're doing. So that compliance and privacy piece is a really important part in terms of the governance. And then the next piece really is around how do we look at deploying AI. So there are a couple of things. We believe that AI will affect every job in the organization, some more than others. And therefore, a basic level of literacy is required right across the organization. If you think, David, a few years back when there was the whole digital transformation, everyone had to bring up themselves up to speed and a basic level of understanding around what does digital actually mean. And so that's sort of an important part of the journey that we're on. And it goes all the way to the top. It goes from the board all the way to the most junior employees. So there's a thread that's pulled through the whole organization. With the board as an example, we took them out to the West Coast. We went and met with a number of our customers and vendors to bring up their level of understanding, as well as share best practices and what we're doing internally at Mastercard. And for the masses, some things like we just mentioned about the AI learning takeover is sort of that basic foundational literacy. Then as we think about specific jobs that are going to be impacted even more, so the software engineers, or even within HR, taking it closer to us, my people and analytics team are using AI and data and becoming experts in that particular area and what they can do to mine the data and to really look at what we're doing and to provide a level of governance in the HR function. So I've got my recruiting team, and they're also deploying AI tools, from a productivity perspective to do basic things like scheduling, but now going to the next level to thinking through how do we make sure that we can have some level of candidate experience through an AI-generated tool that can customize a note that goes to you every 3 months saying, hey, David, what's been happening? These kinds of things do require a level of responsibility that we have to ensure that we have, and building up these skills across the workforce are really, really important.
And again, another good example as to how AI can augment the HR professionals, really, by taking away some of the more laborious, repetitive tasks and allowing them to focus and probably doing them better, frankly. But then actually freeing up those professionals to focus on the really more value-adding and more enjoyable work as well. So some really good examples there. And as part of that wider thing, AI is here to help augment human capabilities, hopefully not replace them. From your experience as someone that's rolling this out across Mastercard, how do you see AI transforming leadership and managerial roles, for example, at Mastercard?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've actually have done a lot on this particular topic because. So let me take a step back. So leadership and talent development and building the future pipeline to ensure that we've got resilience in our whole critical roles that we've got is a real top of the order priority for me and the team. Late last year, we put out there a new Mastercard leadership profile, which basically articulates what we're looking for leaders in Mastercard. So that's sort of one aspect. So things like, leading and driving change and driving results, all the way to anticipating, what changes are happening in the marketplace, and obviously the other aspect around team and team leadership. So all of these aspects there. So that's sort of one piece. In terms of leadership development, we've also spent quite a bit of time investing in our leaders and the leadership development program. So we've done things like coaching circles and thinking through aspects around what are some of the tensions that leaders need to work through. And quite often, for a leader, it's not necessarily a one or the other. There's the and in between, and managing these tensions. So an example would be in one of our behaviors, we talk about collaborating and getting different perspectives, but at the same time moving fast. And those, listeners to this podcast know that quite often those aspects can come into tension, because on the one hand you're saying I need to collaborate and socialize my ideas, but at the same time you want me to move fast. If I collaborate and socialize ideas, it's going to take a lot longer. So we spend quite a bit of time with our leaders to talk through some of those tensions to make sure that we get to the outcome that quite often it's not an either or, it's an and that's an important aspect. As it relates to AI is a great tool. I've been able to use. I do use it quite frequently in my day-to-day work to help me with brainstorming particular ideas, or if I'm thinking about doing some kind of coaching with someone, I will put. Actually, we're doing a pilot with one of our partners on a coaching pilot. So it's basically a coach in your pocket, if you will. But the idea is that it will provide you with standard responses and ways in which you can ask questions of your team or your peer or whoever it may be. But you as the human have to still put in the context. You know the person better than an AI tool. You can't delegate empathy. You can't delegate, sensing. That doesn't come from a tool. It comes from the human. And so we're very clear in terms of those aspects of the employee experience, that it still has to be, has to be felt warmly, has to be sincere and authentic. And the individual, you use the word augment, they have to augment, and the tool augments the human. If you put those two together, it can be very, very powerful.
No, really interesting. And I think great example that you're using it yourself, for, as you said, for brainstorming, for supporting coaching. It's interesting, some of the research that we did at Insight 222 last year on HR functions that have built a data-driven culture, and we could certainly extend that to AI. It highlighted the important role that the chief people officer and the HR leadership team play in role modeling. So not just expecting HR professionals to acquire these skills and maybe giving them the means to do that, but actually acquiring those skills ourselves as leaders and role modeling that being really important. So I think another good example of you doing that, I think, at Mastercard. And I guess, we put a lot of expectation on our leaders and our managers, and I think there's an argument that that being a leader, being a manager, is a lot more difficult than maybe it was 10 years ago, maybe certainly before the pandemic. More distributed teams, more people not working in front of you, maybe, or on a more regular basis, having to embrace new technologies and digital technologies as well. So it's so important that we support our leaders and managers to develop, because ultimately therein lies the success of our organizations, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the role of leader has changed significantly, in particular the last few years. And I know a lot of the listeners have experienced the same sort of thing, where, our workforce has changed. We've got these, multi-generational teams that we're working through. The world has become complicated, to say politely. And yet every organization is still looking to win, to perform. Investors are wanting to back winners. And so the focus on performance hasn't gone away, but the sentiment of employees has changed. And I think managers are having to think differently around what is management, what is leadership, how do I create a vision that people will follow, how do I bring, an authentic aspect to my team, as well as navigating, return to office policies and flexibility in all those kinds of well-being, all of those aspects. And we're expecting a lot of our leaders. And so it is a very, very challenging time to be a leader in this day and age, which is why we are investing a lot in this particular group, because they are the force multipliers, if you will, of culture and enabling, the workforce again to perform and to be a place where people not only want to come, but they want to stay.
So just continuing that theme, Michael, with AI, the skills required from our workforce, our leaders, and HR professionals ourselves are fundamentally going to change. What we're seeing from many of the companies we work with at Insight 222, big global organizations like yourselves at Mastercard, is this turn towards becoming a skills-based organization. And you mentioned this earlier. So I know, and the listeners know if they've been listening, that at Mastercard, you've been doing a lot of work in this area for a number of years. Can you share a little bit more about your kind of transition to be more skills-based, why you're doing it, how you've done it, and maybe some of the benefits that you're experiencing?
Yeah, so this whole area of skills-based hiring, skills-based development, all those aspects are really, really key. And I think in our industry, and I know many of the listeners, their own industries, the world is changing very fast. And so the dependency or reliance on, you learn something and that's it, doesn't cut it. 4-year college degrees don't cut it. And we tell our interns when they come here, it's just the 4-year degree is just the start of the learning process. Actually, it's got to be ongoing. And so that aspect around, if you're creating a culture of innovation, entrepreneurship, results-driven, you want to be able to make sure that muscle in the organization is really bred deeply across every level. And I mean every level. And I mentioned earlier the earlier example with the board. It does go through all the way through. And so learning is really key. So skills-based, why is it key? Because if we want to be competitive, if we want to win, we need to make sure our workforces have got the adaptability or agility to learn different parts of what we're doing. So if we've got someone who has grown up, very focused on products in a particular area, and now we're moving to blockchain or crypto, they need to be able to develop the skills and the knowledge about what does that mean? How is that going to impact the work that I do? And equally within HR, we encourage our teams to continually learn and adapt on the different aspects of the role of a HR professional, whether it's on the compensation and reward side, benefits, external trends. We spend quite a lot of time not just focusing internally on our pulse surveys and so forth, but equally what's happening externally. And I think that's a really important shift that's happened in the last few years as well, that you need to be really clear about what is also happening that you can bring in to your organization as well. That external lens is really, really key.
And in terms of with that transition to more skills-based talent management practices, you've implemented a talent marketplace. I think you call it Unlocked at Mastercard. How have you seen it impact the experiences that employees have within the organization?
It's changed quite a lot. I mean, we just finished our third quarter pulse survey, and one of the dimensions I was really pleased to see that we pulsed was around career development and career growth opportunities, and we saw a 9-point improvement in that particular dimension. And so what we're beginning to see is that people are adapting to this approach of this skills-based architecture that we have that has democratized access to projects. So a good example is that, a manager based in Colombia put a project onto Unlocked that they needed particular skills and resources. So someone that had some data expertise, someone who was focused on government relations. Anyway, they compiled a team. Some of the resources that volunteered, so they've got 30% of their time, volunteered to this project, and they were based in other markets. So one person was based in Singapore, another one in Australia. And so what happens then is this individuals are getting access to projects they wouldn't normally if they stayed within their business unit silo. And equally, the managers are getting these diverse perspectives and skills that they haven't had to hire in a consulting firm. They're actually getting it real time from some of our own employees that have got these expertise and skills that are being utilized in new and different ways. And I think that's part of the future of skills-based organizations, to continually, up your game. We have learning guilds as an example. So we've got these guilds in our technology area that are focusing on special parts of tech evolution. So whether it's to do with customer delivery, or it's to do with software engineering or cloud, people can actually enroll in programs in these different guilds that we have. That's another way of complementing all the other formal and informal training that we've got. So you're basically building an ecosystem, in this growth ecosystem that just provides people with opportunities that may not have been there before. And I think that's a really important part of this skills-based organization.
And back to one of your earlier points, Michael, it supports your workforce planning in terms of identifying where you've got gaps, closing them a little bit through learning, a little bit through some of this project-based work, and obviously people then are participating in those projects are actually not only showing they've got those skills, they're developing them further for other opportunities down the line, I guess. And
it does. I mean, it helps with things like retention. We've also seen about a third of people that have gone on to these different projects moving to different jobs because they've actually said, well, actually, I'm very interested in that area. And so we've also seen, from a career development perspective, it's really helped it. I think the big piece that I think we're really happy with is that we've got about nearly 90% of the workforce that have embraced this internal talent marketplace. And I think if you want to make these work, it has to have scale, because then you've got visibility of the entire organization's skills base, as well as access to various projects that are happening right across the organization. And I think that's been a big part of our learning around how we deployed this. It wasn't just the technology platform. It was around a role modeling and a signaling from the leadership that this was the way that we're going to do it. And we had, as you know, David, that I'd shared before, there was some resistance early on because people were, particularly managers, were saying, well, I'm going to lose some of my people to other projects and other teams. And we said, look, we have to think through this through the lens of an enterprise and what is the benefit overall for us as a company. And once we had that signaling from the very top, from the CEO that's very keen to understand how we're tracking, what's the sentiment, what can we be improving, that also gives a signal to the leadership and our employees that this is a great vehicle, is a one-stop shop, if you will, for their learning and skills development we've got in the organization.
A powerful example, Michael. And we will definitely, because you've talked to various elements related to culture, we will get to that at a point, because I know you've done, as you said right at the start, you've done a lot of work around culture at Mastercard and really tying it to its impact on the business. But before we do that, we recently had Linda Gratton and Diane Gearson on the Digital HR Leaders podcast, to talk about the rise of the gig economy and the blended workforce. And there's research that suggests that younger generations in particular are opting for independent working or pursuing side gigs to expand on their skills. Are you seeing that with Unlocked and this approach to this internal talent marketplace that you've got, that you are retaining and connecting with these younger generations maybe more than you were prior to that? And I'd love to hear your opinion around the blended workforce as well, and the impact that's having or maybe not having at Mastercard.
Yeah, no, look, I think it is. And I think Linda and Diane are great examples of really professing that that's sort of the direction. And as we think about the multi-generational workforce that we have, and we look at Gen Z in particular, what is it that motivates them? Quite often it's a sense of purpose and mission. We've just spent some work ourselves doing a look at our employee value proposition. And a couple of the things that we saw coming out around what is it that really connects individuals, things like technology innovation, social purpose, obviously growth opportunities. But this whole mission and purpose is a very, very important thing. So we've got a couple of things that we do that allows people to extend themselves beyond the day-to-day work. So things like volunteer programs. So we've got extensive volunteer programs. Every employee can take 5 days of leave to work on their charity or their community projects, and we celebrate it. We have an annual CEO Force for Good Awards, which we highlight individuals that have gone above and beyond to help a particular community on whatever issue it may be. That's a great way to be able to extend your skills outside of the workplace. On the internal talent marketplace, I think I gave a couple of examples. The one example I didn't share, which I think is another one linking to your point, we've also partnered with government. And so with the New York City government, we've connected with them to basically say, hey, if you've got particular projects in aid of community, we also have individuals that can volunteer to help you. And so some of the projects are things like data, working on data projects, working on cleanup projects. So all kinds of projects. And we're thinking through this other aspect, David, where using this internal talent marketplace, being able to deploy some of our teams to work on projects with our customers. So we've had customers that are saying, hey, Michael, we love what you've got and what you're doing. How do we get access to some of your talent in your organization? And so we're now piloting this idea of the customer putting a project. So in our case, it might be a bank or a merchant or a government, but basically putting a project and people apply into it. So again, we've got those aspects as well. So I think, it's looking at this whole multi-dimensional approach to skills and agile workforces, remote working, gig workers, and so forth, and contracting in people to work on a particular task or activity. These are all things that I do believe they will be part of the future makeup.
Yeah, and fascinating. It's got collaboration between companies around sharing talent, essentially, I guess what we've just talked about there. And, and obviously you could just see the benefits potentially for all the parties that get involved in that. So, Michael, before we get to the summing up, you've talked a lot about culture, and certainly, what it appears to be, and what I know that I've seen published in the past from speaking to some of your team, culture really is center stage within Mastercard. You talked right at the start about how you've worked with the board and the leadership team to show that the benefit that culture has on the business. Love you to share a little bit about that, because I think sometimes culture can be this kind of slightly nebulous thing in many organizations, but it sounds like you've gone much further than that at Mastercard in really connecting it to business outcomes.
Yeah, so quite a few years ago, I think back 2019, our chair of the board at the time asked me to put together a dashboard on how culture looks at Mastercard. So if you think about, you're a pilot and you're sitting in the cockpit, you want to be able to look at all the different dials to see, what is the health of your organization. And so we put together a culture health index, which basically looks at culture through the lens of obviously people, so the strength of our succession, engagement, sentiment. So we've got one aspect there. We have another lens within the Culture Health Index, which is around inclusion. And so how do people feel from a sense of belonging aspect? We have one around brand. So how well is Mastercard perceived in the external world through the lens of social media or through patents that our teams develop? And thought leadership articles that we put out there. So partnerships with academics or academic educational institutions as well. And then the final thing, we have an index on innovation. And so this whole aspect around how quickly we move products from concept to scale, production, and then obviously a return on the investment. And so with each of these indexes, we have a score, a range, in which we look at every 12 months, and every quarter we basically look at how we're progressing against these different aspects of what we determine the health of our culture. And I then present that back to the board to demonstrate where we are sitting. And why this is really important is because obviously, we give ourselves a pat on the shoulder when things are going well and we're in the range. But if there is one quarter where we see a particular indice dropping outside of the range, it is a signal. And we ask ourselves, is this a systemic issue that we need to really tackle, that we're going to see an ongoing downward trend? Or is this transitory? Has an event happened in the past quarter that's impacted sentiment? So, for example, if you're announcing a restructure, people are going to be anxious, and therefore you may see one of those indices dropping down, which in fact we have seen. So we then have to say, well, what do we need to do? What muscle do we need to flex to ensure that we're bringing people along that change journey, that we can address that? And so that's what we've been doing. That's why this is such an important aspect, that we are constantly looking and monitoring the health of our culture, because ultimately it is the differentiator in terms of if you're going to be successful, not just hit your numbers, but the way in which people feel about your brand, about your organization.
No, thank you for doing that, and really powerful as well, because obviously as HR leaders, if anyone can be bringing to the board and the leadership team culture topics that are helping support performance or may have a future negative impact, it's important that we're flagging those early, and then we're able to do further investigative work, I guess, and take actions to mitigate against that. So it's a really good example, Michael. I mean, if we were to sum up our conversation, I think it's probably, I don't know if you agree, but I think it's very fair to say that the HR function at Mastercard has shifted to be a real strategic partner to the business, rather than what maybe we see in many other organizations where HR is a support function. Do you agree with that? And B, what guidance would you give to maybe other chief people officers that might be listening to this, or other senior HR leaders that kind of want to move their HR function along, progress upwards?
Yeah, look, no, your summary is spot on. It really is seen as a strategic partner enabler to the success of the business. Advice that I was given was which I thought is really important, is around aligning quickly with your executive team, particularly the CEO and the board. And I think those partnerships and those relationships are critical in terms of ensuring that you're aligned in terms of your vision and what they want to achieve, as well as how HR can really help enable that vision to come through and to be realized. So I think those partnerships are really key, and ensuring that for the CHRO, also having partnerships across the organization, particularly the chief financial officer, the general counsel, the communications team, the investor, all those partnerships are really, really key. So that's sort of one. I think the other piece is having a very clear picture as well around what value you bring. And so, developing a people strategy which answers the question about not just how you're attracting, retaining, developing talent, but what is it that you're doing to differentiate that's going to help enable and drive the business. And I've done 2 now, people strategies, where every year we iterate and we look at what's going on and what's working, what's not working. That's a really important part to ensure that the people strategy enabling the business strategy and vice versa. They're really critical things, David. And I think the final thing I would say is having the right team, and transforming our own HR functions as well, being the role model that you're expecting other people in the organization to do. HR has to sort of eat its own medicine, or swallow its own medicine as well. And so leading transformation, leading innovation, being proactive, looking at what's happening externally and so forth, I think there's a role that we have to play as well, and making sure that we're investing in upskilling our own teams to be able to take that and earn the right to be that strategic partner to the leadership of the organization as well.
No, that really good. I mean, and we have a huge opportunity as HR professionals, but as you said, the opportunity means that we have to continue to be reskilling and upskilling ourselves, not just focusing on helping the organization and the workforce to do that, but we need to be doing it ourselves as well, don't we? And that gives us the opportunity through data analytics, AI, to really support the organization in that transformation. Michael, this is the last question, and this is a question we're asking everyone on this series of the podcast. It may help you summarize some of the stuff that you've already mentioned. It might allow you to provide another example. How can organizations use workforce data to drive culture, inclusion, and engagement?
Yeah, so as I mentioned at the beginning, just recently, the data helps drive the insights that you need. It's like, as I said, the analogy of the pilot in a cockpit of an aircraft. CHROs and HR teams need to have that data and insights to know where to invest, where there is utilization, where there's not, where there's alignment, where there's not. Data really is a critical aspect, and for me at Mastercard, I've doubled down on building up my people and data and analytics team. I think I've got a great team, but we're still on the journey, and I think building up that acumen within the team. But everything should be data driven. But then the HR professionals are real differentiators, providing the context as well around how this lands in a particular area. So, if there is a particular area where you're saying, I'm not making enough progress on some of my hiring or some of the skills that I need, why is that? Being able to then interrogate the data to understand what is the context, what's driving behind some of that data is really, really important. So, no, I think data, technology, AI, all of these things combined really are essential tools for the future HR, in my view.
Well, that's a great place to end our conversation, Michael. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Digital HR Leaders podcast. Just before we go, could you share with listeners how they can find you on social media and maybe follow the great work that you and the team are doing at Mastercard?
Yeah, so if they go on to LinkedIn, they can look up Michael Fraccaro, or they can also search Mastercard, and we've got a number of handles there that they can see what we're doing.
Brilliant. Well, Michael, again, thanks for being a guest on the show. Look forward to the next time. Maybe I have the privilege of moderating a session that you're in at a conference or seeing you in person. And thank you very much again for your time.
Thanks for everything you're doing, David, and amplifying the voice of HR on your podcast. So it's really great to be here.
In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.